Hi, it's Nicole, and today I'm here to do my April wrap-up. In April I read 5 books, the first of which was The Edible Woman by Margaret Atwood. I've only read one Margaret Atwood book before, and that's her most famous work, The Handmaid's Tale. So when I saw that my library had The Edible Woman in audiobook form, I decided to take it out because the type of work that I do as a designer, I can just listen to things while I'm working and it doesn't bother me or anything, and there's no problems with that. So I basically listened to it over a day or two at work, and I found it to be a really interesting experience. Not because the book itself was super compelling for me necessarily. I liked the story, I think. I found myself making a lot of links with The Edible Woman and The Vegetarian by Han Kang, not just because of these women that end up rejecting meat and going towards a vegetarian diet and then that becoming a more extreme something or other, but also because of the commentary on women and women's roles and being consumed by other people and not having control of one's direction and all of these kinds of things. And I guess that's what you can reduce The Edible Woman to. This narrative of consumption. And then throughout the reading I also found myself thinking about Kimbra's song Settle Down, because a lot of those themes are encompassed in this story. And despite the story being written and set in the 90s, it feels very, to me, like a story that's supposed to be in the 50s or something, which is kind of the setting for Kimbra's song as well. Overall, I think I liked the story. Unfortunately, I still feel a little bit lukewarm towards Margaret Atwood, but I think I liked this story probably more than The Handmaid's Tale. And I'm still really open to trying more of her works to see which stories kind of work better for me and which don't, because I get the impression that she's an author who doesn't have necessarily just one way of writing and every story might be a little bit different, so I'm willing to try some more. If you have any suggestions of Margaret Atwood books that you particularly liked that are maybe kind of different from the 2 that I've already tried, then just let me know and maybe give me a little kind of overview of what they're sort of about without any spoilers. And I will think about picking those up. The next book I read was actually an advanced reader copy from Galley of Bone by Yrsa Daley-Ward. I'm really a novice in poetry. I don't know really what makes a good poem and what makes a bad poem objectively. I just know this is the kind of poetry that I sort of get on with well, and this is the kind of poetry that doesn't do it for me. So my opinion on this is not at all going to be someone who reads poetry a lot and knows what she's talking about with the finesse of the writing for this style of, I don't know any of that stuff. All I know is that I found this poetry collection to be fairly accessible. The stories were really interesting throughout it, though not all of them were that obvious, which is fine to me, but there were enough of them that I knew what was going on for me to feel intrigued about the ones where that was less clear, and for me to feel happy to kind of fill in those gaps when they were there, because the whole thing wasn't just, I have no idea what's going on here. And I'd like to read more poetry in general to kind of get even more of a feel of what I like and what I don't like and just see what's out there. Following that, I read I Am Not Your Negro by James Baldwin, and I actually did a poll on my Twitter asking my Twitter peeps which James Baldwin should be my first James Baldwin, and later on my cousin had messaged me saying that my aunt suggested that I maybe start with I Am Not Your Negro and then follow that with Another Country, I think she said. So I thought, yeah, alright, fine, I'll do that. And while I did enjoy this, and I thought it was very insightful and interesting and really good to see sort of James Baldwin's mind, I feel like since it's basically a manuscript for a documentary, I think the whole time I was kind of feeling like I really want to and maybe should be watching this as it was meant to be, as a documentary, rather than reading along through things. But the things that I really liked were James Baldwin's commentary on what was happening at the time, juxtaposed with what's happening today. And Raoul Peck, who put the documentary together, and his editor, whose name I forget at the moment, did a really good job with how I assume everything kind of comes together based on the way that the manuscript was and the occasional imagery that you would see put side by side. I am really interested in watching the documentary now and then I'm going to try my second Baldwin at some point. I think the next one that I'd like to try from him, I think I would like to be fiction, so again, I'm taking suggestions if anyone wants to say what their favorite Baldwin fiction is or what they think is the best introduction kind of fiction to James Baldwin. Following that, I read the comic that I bought last month, which was Beauté. I really loved it. I wouldn't say that it's anything super original or anything like that. I think it's probably a basic dark fairy tale gone wrong kind of scenario, playing on the whole thing of like, be careful what you wish for. So the basic premise of it isn't particularly new, but I feel like the way that it's actually done was really, really skillful, and it just feels so strongly like what that world is to me, I suppose. And I think the way that it was executed was just done absolutely perfectly. And I'm hoping that it carries this through the whole series, because it's by the same team who did Miss Touche, which was a series that I really, really enjoyed but didn't like the ending very much. And I'm just hoping that it can sustain the momentum that it has in a way that Miss Touche didn't. The illustration is absolutely phenomenal. Kerascoët is a French illustrator couple, and I don't know how that dynamic works, but whatever it is, they're doing something well. I know that it came out as just one volume in English, but in the French originally it was 3 separate volumes, and so I've only read the first volume and I've ordered the second volume to continue the story. I think if you like fairy tales in general, and if you like the idea of dark fairy tales, then this is definitely one to pick up, especially since it gets dark real fast. 15 pages in, it was just like, whoa, okay. So yeah, I would 100% recommend it. And the last book I read this month was My Year of Meats by Ruth Ozeki. And this one really surprised me. I'd started reading it a while ago actually, and I got about 30 pages in and then kind of put it down. Not because I didn't like it, I just kind of do that sometimes with books. And then decided to pick it up again, started from the beginning, and I just found myself after a while really excited to go back to it, and sort of ended up subtly becoming a book that I'm considering putting in my favorites shelf because it just worked for me really well. Considering its content, I think it did a really good job of not feeling preachy, and I found the characters really compelling and interesting, and although it was subtle, I realized at some point that all of the characters that were really focused on were really interesting female characters, and the male characters were really interesting support characters in all sorts of different ways. I really wanted more of this story and these characters, and it was just really entertaining and informative, and I found myself looking things up when she'd bring in certain things that were presented as fact within the narrative, but some of them I knew to be true in real life, and so every time she would do that I would kind of start to look into more things and find out, is this actually true? And I think everything that I'd looked up was like, oh yes, this is true in the real world, and this is also very disturbing. This book has basically made me really want to read more Ruth Ozeki, but at the same time, similarly to how I feel about Out by Natsuo Kirino, I'm kind of scared that if I read anything else it will just be disappointing to me because I liked the book that I initially read so much, and I don't know, I don't want to be disappointed in that way. I've heard that A Tale for the Time Being is good, but it doesn't sound like my kind of thing, but I'm willing to give it a try, and I've heard that All Over Creation is along the same lines as this story. And talking about links with things like women and consumption and meat and vegetarianism and all of that stuff, this was a book that I was reading at the same time that I picked up The Edible Woman, and so there were a lot of links that I felt with this and that. That was a really interesting reading experience, and I have loads of thoughts, but they're not all super clear and well defined and thought through, but I really loved this book. So there we go. So those are the books that I read in April, and I'm just going to mention that a really super exciting thing that happened in April is that a comic that I did with a local indie publisher called Shortbox got nominated for an Eisner Award, which is kind of like the Oscars of comics, and I'm super excited about that. And interestingly enough, it has similar themes to The Edible Woman and My Year of Meats and The Vegetarian, dealing with social issues and consumption and vegetarianism and all of those things. So that was kind of a really cool thing that happened this month that was also sort of linked to my reading. So yeah, it's been a good month. And now, in a completely unheard of turn of events, I find myself down to only 2 books on my official currently reading shelf right now, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm sure that'll change soon, but 2 books, that's crazy. That's it for April, and I will see you again next time. Bye!